This section will provide suggestions on the discussions the two of you need to have in order to divide your household goods and furnishings, your personal property, and your real property. So let's start with property settlements. The important point is don't spend thousands of dollars arguing about hundreds of dollars worth of stuff. Face it, for most folks, your stuff is used, and it's probably well used. So just think about, even though you may have paid a few $1,000s for that, big screen TV, it's now worth a fraction of that cost. Or the other one I hear about is mattresses. We paid $3,000 for that mattress. Well, how old is the mattress? And I guarantee you it's only worth a fraction now. And the court is not going to give you any replacement cost by any means. The court is going to look at what is the current fair market value of that property, if it even has to decide. I think the best advice on the household goods and furnishings and the personal property is to go into each of the rooms. And you can go in and you can, get those little stickers and put stickers on it. Okay, I'm going to take this, this, and this. And you say, okay, I'm going to take this, this, and this. And the courts would be really happy if all you say is the mutual property, household goods and furnishings were divided to the parties' mutual agreement, and they agree that the division is fair and equitable. And then everyone's happy. The courts do not want to be making those decisions regarding your personal property. What I have seen the courts do is they have actually ordered the parties to put everything up for auction. And I certainly don't think that's a good result for anyone. So that's what I suggest on your personal property and household goods and furnishings. And that might work, for the average stuff. But then there's the stuff, the big buck items, we want to call them. The only items you should put on your spreadsheet are the stuff that has a title, like a car or a snowmobile. Anything else, you can just simply say it was divided equitably. So what about if the two of you can't decide on the value of it? The advice I have for you is that you can just simply provide language that the two of you will agree to use arbitration and be bound by the decision. The courts would like to see that. Or you could simply, use mediation at this point in time before settling your divorce and get those issues out of the way. And that's one way you can go ahead and think about that division of the property. So let's do some special property considerations, how you might want to value those. One, you can use private appraisers. And there was some parties who had railroad collectibles. And any time you have collectibles, you may want to consider using a private appraiser. And they're listed online. You can just, look it up, railroad collection, or there's all kinds of those collections. So what they usually require then is at least pictures of all the items that they're to be appraising, but understand that they're not cheap and they could cost you anywhere from $100 on up from there. I've seen them, $200 an hour in order to do that. So you certainly don't want to have a private appraiser coming in and valuing the personal property. Next, on the vehicles, you might want to use Kelley Blue Book values or NADA. And if you do, choose the middle value, what I call the private party value for each of them, because that just makes the most sense. You don't want to be, using the retail value or any other. Another consideration might be Craigslist. You can find things on Craigslist. I do have a bit of a funny story to tell. There was this fellow, and unfortunately he was my client, and he said he liked to restore old cars. And he said, oh yeah, those cars are junkers. Well, he had listed them on Craigslist for $20,000 and $30,000. And so his wife got a hold of it, and he sort of shot his foot in that one, because obviously if he's listing it on Craigslist for $30,000 or $40,000, you can't be saying it's worth $2,000 or $3,000. Then another place to look is eBay. That one's just self-explanatory for the same reason. What you're trying to do is you're trying to find a reasonable fair market value. Understand, too, that on most personal property, the court's going to be looking at what's the garage sale value or pawn shop value. Because, you'd be surprised. I've been in a pawn shop now, and, women will tend to value their husband's tools at this really large amount of money. And I've gone to a pawn shop, and those things sell for 10 cents on the dollar. So just keep that in mind in how to value, that the court's going to be looking at the smaller value, not at resale value. So then let's talk about real property. Now, the important things you need to know in valuing the real property is that, first, make sure you have an accurate legal description for your paperwork. And that's a really important factor, because if you don't, you might have to go back and amend it in order to have it be accurate, and the county recorder's office can refuse to accept it if it's not a proper legal description. So you're not going to find it on your tax assessed statements. You're only going to find it on the deed. So go and get a copy of a deed. It'll cost you a couple bucks in order to get it from your local county recorder. And in fact, a lot of those are online now for a few bucks. It's better to be safe than sorry. Then understand that when you bought your house, I know you all went and signed a mountain of paperwork. But in essence, what is really important on every real property are 3 items. And that is the promissory note. And that's the note that says, it's your contract with the bank, in which you say, all right, we're going to loan you $300,000, and you're going to pay us $1,000 a month over 30 years at 4% interest, or whatever it is. And that just says, that you promise that you're going to do that. And then the mortgage is simply the security interest. Now, we like to call the mortgage the note along with the security interest. But basically, that security interest is, if you don't pay us like you said you would every month, then after a few months, we can go and we can get the house instead back from you in foreclosure. So then the third document, though, is that legal description, and that changes the legal title. And that is something that you are going to want to do in your divorce decree, is who's going to get it. And again, it's as simple as either spouse A is going to get the house, spouse B is going to get the house, or you're going to sell it. And so think about that ahead of time and make the plan to do it. And even though we have heard time and again that no one is going to refinance for you until the divorce is over, you can at least get pre-qualified. And I strongly recommend you do that, because if neither of you can afford that house on your own, then it has to be sold. And what you want to do is make sure that those refinancing arrangements are in your property settlement. Because if it's not, the question is if you have to go back to court and ask the court then for specific performance, it's called, to make sure it gets refinanced, if you don't have the terms in it, the court may not do anything. So it is really important to have those considerations. And obviously, the more complex that is, the more I recommend that you talk to an experienced family law attorney about getting some good terminology in your divorce decree. And that's all in this section.